All right, Greg, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and we're just going to continue. We were just kind of talking back and forth freely, and I said we just have to press record. So we're just going to keep going. You were telling me about
Well,
you starting CrossFit. So let's just dive right in.
yeah, I'll do a brief overview of what and get to what I was going to say before. But so I started in about 2007. They needed somebody to teach some rowing at what they call Bud School. So then for the Navy SEALs
Yeah.
out in Coronado, California, that's when Greg Glassman and Dave Castro were kind of getting it into the military.
Hmm.
Didn't know anything about it. I just knew that I wanted to go see what the base looked like, and I was in the our guard, which is so a small lower version. And so I wanted to go out there and learned all about it, and basically started CrossFitting right then. I saw basically I was doing triathlons and endurance sports and got my butt handed to me in all these different workouts. And I was like, who is this Greg Glassman guy? I came back and got into it. But that's back when, and you might remember, there used to have a forum page on the old CrossFit
Yeah.
Insight. And one of the longest threads was about rugby. And it was Western Canada. There were several strength coaches, rugby coaches that were promoting CrossFit for rugby training. And then I got really into it. I was kind of like, oh, this is cool. They're using this thing called CrossFit for all these different sports,
Mhm.
no matter how different the sport was. And at the time, the Canadian national rowing team was also using some CrossFit and stuff, a little bit modified
Yeah.
on there. But yeah, it was a very strong rugby kind of background back then. And even the
Yeah.
U.S. team started to mess around with a guy named Tom Brose. He actually runs an affiliate in D.C. now, but he was I think strength coach for the U.S. for the Eagles and was doing some CrossFit.
Yeah, it's back way back when CrossFit was still GPP at its
Yeah.
finest. And then at some point the transition happened between GPP and competition, and the waters got a little muddy, and nobody's sure now what or how it's supposed to work. But no, I remember the quote unquote good old days.
Yeah.
I don't think I wasn't watching, the first years. I remember James Fitzgerald winning the first games in '07. I think I saw the '08, '09. So I think I started following then. And like I said, I started, dabbling in CrossFit a little bit, but then quickly switched to weightlifting and then indoor rowing. So I didn't practice CrossFit for very long, but from the minute I found it, I've always been, following what's going on, how things are evolving, the competitive season, everything that's going on around it. And it's been really cool to see the evolution of, the sport, but also the philosophy in parallel all those years. And now it's funny talking to, some of the young athletes I'm lucky enough to work with, and talking to them about Jason Kalipa and James Fitzgerald and Chris Beeler, and like, who are those guys? Like,
I
how do
mean,
you not know?
even athletes from a couple of years ago, some of the new athletes. I was just actually I got to go to Matt Fraser's opened a gym for his HWPO athletes in Vermont, and was there, and a lot of the athletes getting ready for the games are showing up, and I mean, I'm meeting them for the first time. These are new names, and yet I'm with you. I'm a big fan of the old GPP days,
Mm.
and the competition wasn't for the sake of competition. It was literally to test the philosophy
Mm.
as opposed to just the actual sport of it. I mean, it's still fun to watch. I enjoy watching it, but I enjoyed that the old GPP could be taken into many different sports, and you would excel in whatever you wanted to do. I mean, and then rightly so, you can still do that. So
Yeah, you definitely can, and but it's interesting to see how the philosophy and the sport have almost drifted apart to become, I think I can say polar opposites without going too far, that because the original philosophy, and I think Greg's original journal papers were really interesting in that regard. There was a very much a minimalist kind of tangent to them, right? It was how little work can you do and still get better, but mix things up and never do the same thing twice. So the minimalist undertone was very present in the original philosophy, and now we're in a sport at the highest level where volume is just the name of the game. Is how much can you do before without getting your ass handed to you, right?
it's funny. It's I joke about that being the older guy in any affiliate I go into is like when I first started, a workout could be a 4-minute Fran, and I would show up in surf shorts, a t-shirt, and my regular shoes. Now I go, It's an hour-long class with strength training before it. I have a weight belt, lifting shoes. I mean, I have all this stuff in my bag. And I missed the day that you would just go to the website. Oh, today's workout might be a 4-minute test, or it might be a 45-minute test. And you never really knew.
Mm-hmm.
But then I realized I sound like the old guy and I shut up. So
All right, Greg, the old guy, tell us more about you. Who are you and what do you do, my friend?
so I work for Concept 2. I've been here about 27 years. My degree is in health science, but then I was doing corporate wellness in Maine with a population that wasn't really interested in becoming fit. It was more of a mandated thing. And I realized I wanted to work with motivated people. I had friends that worked already here at Concept 2, and I'm from Vermont, where we're headquartered, and enjoy the idea about going back to Vermont and working with my friends. And when I came back, it was a much smaller company then, and we were doing, I mean, literally it was test rowing machines was part of my job. So training was involved. And then just been here ever since and kind of moved different places and been doing marketing now here for, several years. So
what aspects of Concept 2 marketing do you take care of these days?
So we have a team, so we kind of do everything, but my focus is still primarily, because of the sheer size of the people doing it, is CrossFit is probably one of the biggest ones. And then I call it action sports just because it's overreaching, but we work with I work with, everything from mixed martial arts fighters to, you can see behind me, a lot of motocross, supercross, sports like that, just because those are the sports that I did and enjoyed. Even with rugby, when we reached out, is the owners of Concept 2, the two brothers, they're amazing. And what I always liked about them is that we've always grown by word of mouth. So they were rowers. They knew the sport of rowing, made a machine that helps them in the sport of rowing. And then they told their friends about it. And that was the base. And so I took that philosophy to myself and I said, okay, I use the equipment. I know these sports. I'm going to tell people in these sports I know that this would be good for them, and then see where it goes from there. And over the years, it's only grown. I mean, CrossFit was a little bit easier because it wasn't me telling them that. It was Greg Glassman and all these affiliate coaches telling them that too. But things like motocross, literally, I explained to them about the strength to weight ratio and how good the rower is for building that type of athlete. And any horsepower sport, that it's a lot like rowing. The weight in the boat matters, and the weight on a motorcycle matters. A lot of these athletes would spend thousands of dollars on titanium bolts to shave off fractions of pounds, and yet they were 10 pounds overweight, and they wouldn't exercise or diet. It's like it's definitely changed. The sport has changed a lot in the 20 years or 15 that I've really been focusing on it. These are legit athletes now, or even from a teenage level. They've got trainers, they know nutrition, they know all that stuff. So
it's great to see how different sports have started at different points back in time, and there's definitely a maturity curve to each sport and each discipline. And going back to CrossFit, we see that as well, where before it was enough to do a workout of the day every day and get better. And now what you see is with the top competitors, the season looks nothing like, the .com workout of the day. It's very much an elite sport. You have to periodize, you have to plan, you have to do things that are not CrossFit tests a lot to get better at CrossFit once you reach a certain level, and seeing all those components and those sports grow. And what I find so fascinating is you can quite easily just look to your left and right and see what other older sports are doing, and they're probably doing it better, and then carry that back into your discipline.
Yeah, I mean, it's whenever you've been in a industry for a couple of decades, you see a lot of shifts. And starting out, maybe you never heard about overtraining or the need for recovery. And in the last 10 years, that's always been the buzzword. Everyone's got recovery protocols. But 20 years ago, when you were sore, you tapered, and that was about it. And there was no ice baths and inflatable pants and all that stuff. So I've enjoyed seeing the change, but it almost seems like a lot of times it's complicated just for the sake of for making it more complicated. Like there's a lot of, if you listen to your body and you eat well and you sleep well a lot of times that's enough for 90% of the population.
And that's really the base of the pyramid in terms of recovery, and that's what everybody should be doing, right? The $1,000 boots are
Yeah.
not gonna help you if you're sleeping 5 hours a night and you're not eating well and you're not planning your training intelligently. So like you said, there's definitely fundamentals that are in everybody's reach, but they're usually the boring stuff to do. So
Yeah, exactly.
people
And
like the bells and whistles because it looks cooler and it's not actually as hard as doing the boring shit every day.
it is true. And I say that not to be negative too, because I buy into a lot of it too. And I do have an ice bath and, I do that stuff, but I also, I always say that, I hear people who say they can't sleep or they don't sleep well. And it sounds horrible to me. I enjoy sleep. I'm good at it. It's probably a few talents I have.
That's a
And so
great
I think,
talent to have, man.
yeah, it's
You're gonna live long and prosper with that.
maybe that's it. I mean, who knows what I'm missing out on at night, but I tell you, I really do enjoy it. And I think it's probably the biggest part of my recovery. I really do feel like that's when the body's going to be making the most progress. And then, try to eat as healthy as possible and train smart. So
Yeah, I forget. I mean, many people have said that over the years, but there's nothing more anabolic than sleep, right?
yeah,
If you wanna
right.
grow, if you wanna recover, if you wanna build muscle mass, if you wanna get better, then you gotta prioritize sleep. And if you don't, then you're grasping at straws and you're kind of barking up the wrong tree.
It's funny. I actually do jujitsu now, and I was
Mm.
at class the other night, and there's all these young guys, and they're not very muscular, and after 50 years or 40 years of weight training, I look like I've got some muscles. They always ask me like, what do you do? You know, how do I get bigger and all this stuff? And they ask me about creatine and they ask me about all these nutrition things. And then they tell me that they're up all night playing video games like Call of Duty all night. And I'm like, all right, let's back step a little bit. When you can go to bed at 9:30, and get up at 6:30, then we'll talk about creatine and nutrition and all that other stuff. So
How did you get into jujitsu?
uh, was doing it. I did about a year of it before CrossFit, and then I got really into CrossFit and wanted to compete and stuff, and so I shelved it. And during COVID, of all things, when everybody was separating, I missed being around people, and I found a small pod of people that was doing it, believe it or not, in someone's barn, kind of like the secret fight
That's
club type
awesome.
thing. And really got into it. So I've been doing it now since the start of COVID, and it's just 2 days a week, but I really enjoy the mental side of it. I like the progression, although I feel like I progress much slower than some of these young guys that just pick things up like crazy. And it took me a while to realize that when someone says in jujitsu that you're really strong, they're really insulting you, meaning that's all you have is your strength and not any technique. So I do what I can and I enjoy it. I've got a good group of training friends that's outside of the normal CrossFit world. Like a lot of these guys don't do a lot of training, outside of jujitsu.
Mhm. Do you see the best of the best kind of have to, don't they? Or can you still get away with just training jujitsu and still be at the top of the sport?
I don't think at the top of the sport. I think like anything else, if you want to be the best in your gym and
Mm.
Vermont's a small community, like you can still do it with body weight exercises and then going to class and things. But the elevation of the sport, it's definitely you need to do stuff. And you see the top guys are very, very fit, very strong, and they have, this extensive knowledge that they can solve any problem at any time. I mean, I'll be 80 before I can even come close to that. So
I think Joe Rogan said it's 3D chess with your body, and you have to adjust millisecond by millisecond to what the other person is doing. It's something that fascinates me. A colleague of mine, David, I was actually at his gym just before. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu and has competed for many years, and I find it fascinating. It's the skill level is so high, and like any other sport or discipline, until you've actually set foot in it and tried it, you have no idea how complex it is and how hard it actually is. People make it look easy on TV. That's because they're the best in the world. But any sport, and that's one thing that I've been enjoying so much about coaching and working with all those different athletes in different sports, is trying to understand each sport and dig into it and see what actually happens there. It's so rich. Every sport is an entire world, and jiu-jitsu is the same, right?
I think it's also good for like say masters athletes. And it's good to go into a sport that you're not good at every so often. And it's very humbling. It keeps you, first you're learning new things, which I think is incredibly important. And I know my own, after all these years, I know my strengths and my weaknesses. And one of the things I liked about like CrossFit, my favorite workouts were chippers. Give me a long laundry list of stuff and I will go as hard as I can through that list as fast as I can. But there's not a lot of thinking going on. It was more like a tractor. Just put me in the direction and I'll do the work. I enjoy the work. And jiu-jitsu is the opposite. It's slow down, it's think. And that was I've never been that kind of an athlete. It was more throttle and less brake. And this makes me have to slow down. But I think it's also, everyone has their talents. And I used to joke about going oxygen debt stupid. So like if I was really going hard and my heart rate was very high and somebody asked me my middle name, I might not tell you because I wouldn't know. And this is a lot different like that. It's just I've never had that talent to be able to think and go hard. Like one story I tell, Matt Fraser, who's from Vermont, so I've known him since he started CrossFit, and he was doing the Murph workout and he was going against Josh Bridges, and it was a very hot day and it was a very hard workout. And he kept looking over, I think pretty sure it was Josh. And I asked him later, I'm like, why were you looking at Josh? And he's like, I wanted to know what rep he was on. So he was counting his own reps and somebody else's reps. And I'm like, I can't remember my own reps. I mean, I'm the classic forget where you are in your rep scheme when you're doing it. And just some people can be at that high rev and still be able to think. And that's an incredible talent.
I remember Matt talking about him doing math equations in his brain, in his mind on the rower while he was doing intervals. And yeah. I definitely think, I mean, and you see that, in cycling and those high level sports now, where obviously being able to think while being extremely fatigued and under physical strain is very important in those sports. And like you said, when you get to the level that Matt was at, you're I wouldn't say so far above the rest, but he was far above the rest, and he had the wherewithal to, like you said, look around. And one thing that stood out, I forget what year it was the kind of the mountain bike rope climb workout, 10 rounds or whatever it was, and he thought he was way ahead, and then around from the end he looks to his left and somebody's on his tail. And he was literally in fourth gear and he put the fifth on and he was gone. And just that acceleration on the straight in the last round was, how did he do that? It seems like he was always, in fourth gear. And if he had to put it on the fifth, he could, and he would destroy everybody, but he didn't necessarily need to all the time.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too. I noticed, as a master's athlete now and older, I could still do everything I could do when I was 20 and I feel pretty good about it. What I lost was the gears, like you were just talking about with Matt. Even in playing rugby and running and sprinting, you always kind of said, well, I've got this in my pocket, and if I need to, I can go faster. And I find now at my age is like, I'd like to think that's the case, but I basically have one speed, and so it's like, whether I start going to the track and start working on speed workouts, but my mind will be like, okay, now's the time to push. And I realize that my time never changed. My mind's saying go faster, my body's saying, no, don't do it. So
those are some hard times, Greg.
Yeah, exactly.
If we go back to concept 2 and the history, talk about how the company actually started, because not a lot of people know how it originated in the first place.
Sure. And this is one of the reasons why I love the company so much is it still is a family-owned company. Is Peter and Dick Treisagacker. They're two brothers. They were collegiate rowers. Dick went to the Olympics and rowed. Peter and Dick tried to make the Olympics together in a boat, and they didn't make it. But they always have been very true to the sport. And Peter went to Stanford, rowed for Stanford. Dick rowed for Brown, so very established schools. They wanted to start a business inside of the sport if they could do it. They both were engineers, and they're from the East Coast. They're coming. The way I hear the story anyways, they're coming back from California looking for a place to start the business. And they found this old barn, which is literally still down the road. And they bought this farmhouse, and in the barn, they started making some of the first non-wooden oars for crew. So carbon fiber and fiberglass. They revolutionized the sport with some blade designs that had not been seen. Something called the hatchet blade. Before the blades If you look at any of the old school black and white pictures, the blades always looked like a flower, like a tulip. They actually called them
Mhm.
tulip blades. And then they came out with something that looked more like an axe or a hatchet. So the blade shape
Right.
really revolutionized the sport. From there, it wasn't long after they wanted to be able to train in the wintertime, and our winters are pretty long here. And they made the first rowing machine that was basically a modified upside down bicycle that was bolted to the floor of the barn. And that became the Model A, which would have been 1982. And then from there, we've just been progressing and making it better and better until what we have now. And of course, the ski erg came about probably 15 or so years ago. And then the bike erg came out probably about 6 or 7 years ago. So keep on expanding, but it's all ergometer based
Mhm.
equipment. So
It's crazy to think that the rower is 40 years old, right?
yeah, I mean, it's especially the fact that we have, I mean, you're probably too young to remember, before we even had the online logbook, before there was an internet, we had a newspaper that would go out, and it would, everyone's, at the time, it was 2,500 meters was the standard. And
Okay.
you'd get this thing mailed to you like a newspaper, and it was everybody's rowing times on there and their names from the countries they're in.
This is
And of
amazing.
course, now it's all online, and our database is massive. People that have been rowing, and it could be somebody rowing in their basement, and the next name down could be an Olympic, rower from Switzerland or something like that. So
Do you have an idea off the top of your head how many people log their results into the app or the log now?
I should know. We just talked about it, but I can't remember exactly. But it did really total, I wouldn't know. But I mean, when we do, like, now the biker sprints are going on,
Mm.
and so we can tell each day who's submitting times for the biker world indoor bike sprints. So we can see who's going in there, and it's a lot. The year we did the half marathon and the marathon and the CrossFit Games, it was like the next day people were all doing it, and it was this crazy wave because everyone thought rowing a marathon was just absolutely crazy idea. Like, who would do this? And they're telling me how crazy it is. I'm like, we have 90-year-olds doing marathons. I go, it's not, the secret to a marathon is just don't stop rowing. And 3 to 4 hours later, you're done. So yeah, the logbook is really a neat thing. And yeah, I think probably it's still a small percentage of the people that totally use it. There's still that whole population that just get on their rower, they do their workout, they walk away, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's one point that I try to drive when I'm helping people with their rowing, skiing, biking is just, get onto the log and log into your app and just sync your thing up, and then you can actually track what you do over time. I think it's such a fantastic tool, but honestly 90% of people that I work with don't even know it exists, right? They
It's
they don't even know it's a thing.
it's crazy. I just had a top CrossFitter actually was saw us saying that the biker sprints were coming up,
Hmm.
and he said, "Well, how do I do it?" And I said, "Well, just download Erg data and start an online logbook." And he goes, "What are you talking about?" He didn't know didn't know anything about an app, logbook, nothing. So I kind of basically had to hold his hand and walk him through it and stuff and that. But it's I keep going back to, and as a trainer, is if you don't actually track your progress, you'll never actually the validity of your training program will never be there. And I always
Mm.
like that when I first sat down the first level one when Greg and Dave out in Coronado were teaching, and reproducible results, and the fact that Greg always stressed the named workouts and benchmark workouts. And because at the time I was doing triathlons, I would just go out from a bike ride, go for a swim, go for a run. I roughly knew how I felt for the
Mm.
distance and this and that. When I went to my first affiliate, and they handed me a notebook, and they said, every day after class, you're going to write down what you did. And then the next time we do this, you're going to look back. And it blew my mind. I mean, I was already a health science major, and like, no one was talking about this stuff. But yet, Concept 2 has been doing that, with the logbook, and it makes it so simple to see. Like, I can literally click a button and see all my 2K times,
Mhm.
for the last, since it's been there, and see if am I slipping? Am I getting faster? I can clearly see I put in more meters in the wintertime, obviously, because I'm not outside doing stuff. It's really a neat thing. I mean, I would encourage anybody who hasn't seen it to go on and start an online logbook and
Absolutely. Anybody listening who doesn't have an account there, just pause the podcast, go download Erg Data. It's a free app. You just enter your stuff and then you just sync it up to your PM5 when you get onto your machine, and you get all your data logged automatically. You can go back and see monthly reviews, weekly reviews, all your totals, all your best scores, all your training volume. That's I think a great way to track the volume that you're doing on those ergs at least. So yeah, highly encourage everybody to go and do that.
The nice side thing too is that we do monthly challenges. So
Yeah.
these people who are just using the ergs for fitness, it can get a little bit boring doing the same 30-minute workout all the time. So we have monthly challenges that might be like, oh, this, the big one that I never miss, and it's the one I do all the time, is the holiday challenge. So you sign up and you pledge to say, I'm either going to go 100,000 meters or 200,000 meters between Thanksgiving and Christmas. It keeps you very honest. Every day you have a plan. You're going to go on there. You're going to do this, and which is crazy. Of all the years I've done it, there's names that keep popping up near me that I don't know. They're from other countries, and I'm like, wow, this guy, I recognize that name from years past, and we're still there. So there is this kind of community of people doing the same thing you're doing that you may never meet, which I think is also very cool.
That's definitely something I realized when I switched from weightlifting to indoor rowing. I mean, that transition took a while. It wasn't straight from one to the other, but just finding out all those people that are, like you said, rowing in their basement and still sharing their times, and there's really a strong community. And you look in certain countries, in England, for example, you have such a huge community that they have massive competitions, massive indoor competitions, and it's not even restricted to the 2K, right? You'll have a sprint on the 500, you'll have a 5K or a 10K, and those things are really starting to expand, and it's great to see.
Yeah, and like for me, we used to this is how small, when we used to have to race Crash Bees. Crash Bees was the former world indoor rowing championships, and if you wanted to go down to Boston and help with the event, the owners made you race. So you would be there building machines, and then the next day working the event, and they'd be like, oh, hey, your time's coming up, you have to go race. And I actually still get nervous on a 2K. It still makes me a little sick to my stomach. But what I enjoy are the ones you said, like the team events, the team 2K, getting on and off machine, and transitions matter. Depending on how you like your pain, there's an event for all of you out there. So if you want slow pain, you can do the marathons, at a 215 to 220 pace, or you could go for the 500 fly and die and just fill yourself full of lactic acid and be done in a minute and 7 seconds or 8 seconds or something like that. So
yeah, absolutely. What you talked about the fact that before it was 2,500 meters and not 2,000 meters, the standard. How come I didn't even know that.
it had to do when we switched. This is way back in the technology when we were growing. We were trying to make the drag factors on the old Model A's and B's similar to a 2K time on the water.
Yeah.
And when the technology got better and we got more science in the machines, we realized that it was more accurate at 2K than 2,500 on there. And boy, it would have been, I'm trying to think, it was when I was in college, it was still 20. So probably right around, this is probably around the 1993, 4. I'm trying to think, as we went to 2K. I'm not quite sure. It's a long time ago.
Yeah, it is. Another thing you mentioned is the marathon at the CrossFit Games. Talk about the logistics of setting that up.
That was the most stressful event I've done in my entire life. So we had already done a half marathon, which I thought was an amazing race. We actually just posted it on Concept 2's Instagram, where Jason Khalipa, a strength athlete, admittedly built like a gorilla, and you had to do a 2K and then without stopping, continue on to do a half marathon. So you had to be a sprinter in distance. And when Jason went out fast, I said, oh, he's just going to go for because you got points for both. I go, his strategy, he's going to win the one and then just basically stop and rest for the next event. And he did amazing. I forget what his 2K time was, but it was a legit 2K time, even if it was only a 2K. It was really impressive. And then he slowed right down. And I'm like, okay, my suspicion is correct. And then about 100 strokes in, he starts bringing his pace back down to like a 2 minute, I think it was, or a 2:05, and he just held it. And he was very smart. He had that plan from the very beginning. He said he was going to do it to his normal 2K. He was going to give himself 100 rest strokes and then continue on. So that was logistically, we had women on one side, men on the other. And it was really hard. We had it going up to this big jumbotron, and you could see the lanes, and so people could watch it and whatnot. And at the time, I'm like, I'll never do a more difficult event in CrossFit. And then I forget how many years later, I think it was 2000, was it 10? Maybe I can't remember the years now, is when Dave Castro asked if we could do a full marathon. And that's when it was like, because we had to cable everything. And if you watch the video, these athletes sweat so much, like really just flooded underneath their machines with sweat and who knows what other fluids and things like that. And it was all on our cables. And it's a long event. It means I had to worry about it breaking for basically 3+ hours. I mean, I was pulling my hair out, and we had a false start that kind of screwed things up at the start. So I was already on edge. But yeah, I kind of jokingly say I probably made more CrossFitters cry than anybody else because of the machines. But it's always fun. CrossFit challenges us. We know how to do indoor rowing events. That's not a big deal, but it's never just an indoor rowing event with CrossFit. They always kind of throw in some kind of extra twist.
I like that 2000 buy-in into the semi, and from memory, I think that was the year prior, Kalipa got pretty beat up on the rower. And I remember him actually carrying a rower in his truck all year, and he probably rode every single day. And there's no surprise that he was better a year later.
And Rich Froning was another one. It's interesting because I talked to Rich at the events and stuff, but we're not like close friends or something like that. But at the games, I was asking him about how his rowing was improving, and he made it a goal. I don't know if it was before that event or after it, to do 1 million meters in a year, which ends up, I think he was doing 10K every morning. He'd get up and do 10K. And just that much time on the rower improved him so much. Not to mention just that baseline cardio zone 2-ish, was what really helped him. But Jason, back in the original CrossFit, like they had the first running event, I think it was a 5K, and it was in California at Dave's ranch. And I thought he was going to die. He came across the line and literally thought he was going to die. I mean, he was collapsing, and I'm like,
he wasn't built for running, this guy.
No, he wasn't. And here he is, not that many years later doing this in an endurance event. And as much as I like Jason a lot, I would never have put money or bet on him. No way, so.
Yeah.
I think in the marathon, was it Esslinger, Lucas Esslinger? He was from Switzerland, right?
Yeah. It's a athlete, yeah.
And what was crazy about that, because we tell people how much easier rowing is with good technique, but he did that whole marathon in a series of deadlifts. I swear, I'm watching him. I'm like, he's never going to last. And then he did. He would just take a stroke, very powerful, 2 breaths, another stroke, did it again. I mean, it wasn't the way that I would have done it, but he did it, and he did really well. So.
Yeah, I think the point you brought up is a really important one to me. I treat the rower and the ski erg as you would weightlifting. It's a technical movement first, and then you can build capacity on it. But if you're inefficient in your movement from the start, then again, you're probably focusing on the wrong thing, and you should rather slow down and then build that technique over time, just like you would with an empty bar, and make sure your positions are right, make sure your sequencing is right, and it's going to pay dividends. And the great thing with that is you don't have to work very hard. You just have to be applied in your technical work, and it is going to translate in more watts and lower splits in the harder stuff.
I know that's one of the things that made me want to do the podcast with you when I saw it was the French throwdown that you were teaching technique, right? And my pet peeve is I go to so many affiliates, and everyone comes up to me, oh, my rowing is terrible. My rowing is terrible. Help me with my rowing technique. And I'll watch them, and they'll practice their snatches in their Olympic lifts. I've never seen them practice the rower. I'm like, when was the last time you got on a rower, not in a WOD, and just worked on stroke mechanics? And they don't do it. It's almost like, it's not painful. There's no barrier to it. It's very easy to get on and do, and yet nobody does it. But everybody wants to complain about, even especially people who are shorter. They're like, oh, I'm never going to be good at rowing because I'm short. And I watch them row, and I'm like, you could be a lot better at rowing if you learn some technique. I mean, yes, you're only going to go so far down the rail, but you can make it easier on yourself. And, it's tough, because I also want people to enjoy rowing for what it can do for you and not nitpick the technique all the time. But I'm very honest with them, saying, you're very strong, you have decent times, but with some technique, this could be so much easier for you,
Yeah.
especially for CrossFitters, where the next workout, could very well, this could help them if they could still place in the same position with the other athletes, but do it by putting less stress on their body over in a game situation over the course of the week. It really is going to help them, rather as opposed to just like we jokingly hear, like farm kid strength. Just say, okay, I'm just going to beast mode the rower and screw the technique kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I hope it's just a cultural thing and it's temporary. And in the same way that we've seen CrossFit go to weightlifting coaches and learn how to integrate that into the training of the sport, go to gymnastics coaches and integrate this back into CrossFit. I think the next step is to consider the monostructural work as a whole world in and of itself, and then focus on it just like you would if it was your sport. And that includes, like you said, breaking down the technique, slowing down what you're doing, not just going beast mode because it's the rower. Just learn how to move properly. And the analogy I often use is that of weightlifting. And if you look at the best in the world, they train probably twice a day, maybe more for some. And you look at the high level athletes and they spend a good 10-15 minutes with an empty bar in their hands every single training session. So they're doing, say, half an hour of technique work a day. They're doing 3 to 4 hours of technique work a week. And we're not even capable of doing 10 minutes of technique work on the rower per week. And that's often what you need. You need maybe 3 times 10 minutes a week, and you can really make some damage in a matter of 3 to 4 weeks.
It's and the other thing too is varying the distances and intensities too. It's in CrossFit with our equipment, it's always about short number of calories where you're just going hard, and ego plays a big role in it. They're used to seeing 150 splits or 145 splits. Now, if I told them to row for 20 minutes at a 215, their ego won't let them do it. But yet they're not going to learn technique with that high of an intensity. They need to back the intensity down. Just like your analogy, you're not going to learn with 225 on the bar, but you'll learn with an empty barbell. And that's the intensity portion of it. It also, Coach Bergner was, we love Coach Bergner and been around him forever. And he's been out here, and people can quote Bergner about leaky power by early arm bend and all this different stuff. And they basically can quote it. It's on t-shirts, but they can't figure out that if you bend your arms too early in a rowing stroke, you're not utilizing, the posterior chain and your quads as much. It's like, why do they understand one? They don't understand the other, because you turn it horizontally. You take the lift and you put it horizontally, and their mind just gets blown. It's like, oh, why? It's the same mechanics. It's always bothered me.
I 100% agree. And you were talking about the French throwdown, and I opened the little workshop that we did on the row with this. I said, you guys know how to row, but you just don't know it yet, because you guys all know how to weightlift, and you've all done technique work, and you know how to first go with your legs, and you don't want your back angle to change in that first pull, because you want to be stable and generate a platform to then accelerate into the second phase, and then the finish, and then drop under your bar. And you can transfer so many aspects of coaching weightlifting into coaching the rower if you just can transfer them over. And like you said, the early arm bend, the opening too early, the not accelerating the handle throughout and just being a kind of a one speed. And like you said, for CrossFitters, it should be easy because they focus on weightlifting technique a lot. They know the importance of it, and all they have to do is turn it sideways, and they can do the same on the rower.
It is. It's and I try not, because also too is, unfortunately, the sport of rowing, the purist in the sport of rowing, it's hard for me if someone posts a video, CrossFitter, or even a strength person posts a video on Instagram of them rowing. All the former collegiate rowers feel like they need to go in there and make fun of the guy and tell them that their technique sucks and all this stuff, and not in a good way, not in a helpful way. And so I don't want to be that guy. If I see somebody who asks me for help, I say, listen, we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to try to get you from ugly to decent, and that's going to pay big dividends. But then when I leave, you're in charge of going from decent to good, and that's going to be the 20 minutes of easy rowing with maybe even a mirror next to you, or videoing yourself, and am I opening too early, which I mean, you've seen it. The biggest CrossFit mistakes I see is opening too early, not going to full leg extension, early arm bend. There's some classic things that we see that only get amplified in competition. The nice thing is, if you look back at old videos from the early games, we have made a huge gain in better rowing over the years. Once there was more money in the sport and the top athletes are finding ways to help themselves, it's more of that local CrossFit competition, Friday night in the box type stuff where you're going and you're like, oh my goodness, this really got to help some people here.
Yeah, and I remember from my rowing years, it helps so much when you can focus on that technical aspect, especially when you're really suffering. I mean, I remember that was the only thing that held me together was counting to 10, because I just counted to 10 strokes and then back from one. And that's all I did during the whole thing, and just focused on one or two technical components. And I just tried to do the best that I could and maintain whatever pace that I was aiming for. And really focusing on that technical aspect it doesn't take the mind away from the pain, because the pain is there, but it just makes it more manageable, because you know what you're working for, right? You're not just aimlessly pulling. I'm trying to make every single stroke as efficient as I can, because otherwise I'm leaking power 30 times, 35 times a minute, and that's just too much.
And you made a great point too, is that unless you row different distances at different intensities, you never can truly pace our equipment well, because you need to know how you're going to feel at a 150 pace, 10 minutes in, 15 minutes in, even, you really need to know how your body reacts to that pace and what you can expect to come later. You and I are probably doing it long enough that I know when I'm stealing from the bank. I know when my pace is too fast that I can't hold it anymore. And so you need to know how to do your start, see that amazing split and go, I could do this all day. And then realize you can't do it all day, and know where to back it down and settle and just hold that pace. And then, that's usually my race plan for everybody when I tell them is like, get the low split to start, settle into your known pace. And then with about 300 meters left in whatever you have to do, or say 45 seconds left in the event, then empty the tanks. And you can't have a good race strategy unless you know how your body reacts to intensity and time on the machines.
Another thing that helped me recently, when I started digging into the units and the conversion from unit to unit, one thing I realized is that the split scale is not linear, contrary to the watts, for example. So to give a concrete example, everybody knows 205, right? 2 minutes and 5 seconds per 500 meters, for example. The switch from 205 to 2, it's a 5-second difference. It's about a 25 watt difference if we take the power scale. And now if you take a 145 to a 140, that's still 5 seconds, but now that's 50 watts. Yeah. So essentially, the lower you're going, the harder and harder it gets. And that's something I never realized. Can you explain why that is?
I can't. I'm sure I could. Peter and Dick could. There's a lot more to it. People, unfortunately, they don't understand the complexity of the machines. They think that the monitor is like reading an old school, magnet on a bicycle wheel, which some equipment in CrossFit is like that, and it's not super accurate. Ours takes into consideration the inertia of the flywheel, the amount of air that's coming into the fan, drag essentially on the damper, acceleration, like you're talking for, the speed at which the chain is coming out of the machine. And they all come up with basically a number that then gets converted into your watts, your calories, and your meters on there. But you can, like I said, I tell people the pain difference between a 146 and a 145 is not the same pain difference between a 205 and a 2 or something like that, or a 205
exactly.
and a 204. And people can just do it on their own, and they can sense that. 1 second at race pace on the erg is horrible. It's not a normal 1 second. It's just the pain that you can develop at that high low 130s to 140 split range. The output's crazy. But.
You talked about the damper. I think that's a good topic to go to. Talk about the difference between the resistance factor and the drag factor and the damper.
So when people know our equipment, if they know our equipment, they'll see it's a screen around the outside of the machine, and then there's a big opening at the side that gets closed off by what we call the damper. The damper is the actual the actual piece of plastic that either lets more air in or shuts it down. Inside the flywheel, there's a metal plate with a fan on it, and those we know the inertia of, so that we can do the mathematical calculations and whatnot from there. The reason why, and this blows people's mind, we allow in competition to set that damper to any number that you want, is because people are going to be efficient at different loads, and the loads are going to be based on how fast that flywheel slows down between strokes. So if it's gobbling in a bunch of air in the side because your damper is at a high number, it's slowing down faster, so that when you take your next stroke, you have to overcome more inertia. And then people can understand that, but I say, but if your stroke rate is higher, then that doesn't have, the flywheel doesn't have as much time to slow down. So it's like, how do you want your loading? Are you somebody who feels more comfortable at a higher stroke rate with a higher drag factor or damper? Or there are some strong men out there and guys that go to the philosophy of the, series of deadlifts. They want it on 10 with 2 seconds or more, a second between strokes, and they just grip and rip it. They might both arrive at that 2K time at the same time. They just did it in 2 different ways. And most of the time from what we see is the people that do well with a high damper and slow stroke rate, they're like, well, don't tell me I should do it differently. I can beat you. And I'm like, yes, you can beat me, but I can guarantee you that if you rode at a normal stroke rate and a normal damper setting, you could beat yourself. That's a lifelong challenge of working for Concept 2, is this explaining the damper and the drag factor. And it's maybe because I've been doing it for a long time, it's not that difficult to understand. It's moving mass, is basically what it comes down to. So
Yeah, what I've seen usually, as you said, is heavier people are more comfortable with a higher resistance, and you'll see it with the top guys. When the guys are going for the 500 or the 1,000 world record, and they're usually going to have a deadlift over 300 kgs, and they're 110 kgs themselves or above, and those guys are going to try to get the rower that can have the highest resistance because they actually need it and they want it, because they know they're going to be at 35-40 strokes a minute, and this is where they're going to be able to exert the most power with their profile and with the distance that they're trying to cover.
And also too, as I always say, is the body weight inertia. If you're a 300-pound or 250-pound athlete and you start moving down a rail on rollers, at some point your body weight is assisting in that pull. You get somebody who is 100 pounds and there's just not that mass that they're working against that flywheel. So yes, the bigger guys can have higher damper settings, but it's very rare that anybody would do better on a 10 unless it's very short distance and they're a very large individual. We just some of the English national team rugby players just did a fun test of 200 meters on there. Okay. And of course I saw everyone in there trashing his technique and all this stuff, and how could he go that fast at that slowest stroke rate? And I'm like, first of all, he's a massive individual. He is a huge man. So that is how he can do it. But he could do better probably with a little bit of rowing technique, but that's not his sport. He's literally trying to develop power on there. So
I want to switch to the ski. And one thing I found really interesting, I definitely spent almost infinitely more time on the rower than I have on the ski, but I've spent some time looking at the videos of all the world records on the ski. And one thing I noticed is that there seems to be a fairly homogeneous consensus in terms of technique on the rower, whereas on the ski, you still see quite a bit of interpersonal variability or variation in technique, even with, the top guys and the top gals in the world on different distances. Some are very short, very snappy, and then some are have a longer stroke. Do you know why that is?
Yeah, I mean, I've got some theories on it, and first thing is that so rowing as a sport or rowing machines have been around a very long time. When we invented the ski erg, there was not a ski erg before we invented it. So the amount of just time for people to figure it out is much less than, say, the rowing machine has been. The differentiation, and you're saying in techniques and styles, again, it's kind of like people not figuring out about opening too early. And if they looked at it in a way that, okay, what's important? We got to keep the flywheel moving quickly. They would start to take a shorter, more powerful stroke, higher in the stroke. Like, so, I mean, you and I both row, so I want to have this go to everybody. So we know that in the rowing stroke, the catch is very important. The catch being at the start of the stroke. That's when the flywheel is moving the slowest, and you need to get it moving as fast as you possibly can. So these people with these very long, straight arms at essentially the catch of the ski erg, what tends to happen if you watch it in slow motion is their body will drop and their arms will stay where they are, which is leaking power in its own way. Whereas if you have a slight arm bend and you can lock the scapula and you can lock the elbow, then you can use the large muscles of your lats, as well as when you start to do your quarter squat, you get the advantage of your body weight also pulling. So in other words, for every inch my hip drops, my handles drop, so that you're moving as one. And for me, especially on the events, I like to have a higher stroke rate. So I'm stopping my stroke at my pockets, essentially at just below my hips. These people that are going very long and trying to snap their hands at the bottom, I feel personally that they would do better if they took more strokes and move that power all up into the first half of the ski erg stroke, as opposed to trying to put that power through. But what's tough is we get some guys and girls that do very well with that long stroke where they're almost pulling to their ankles and they're very strong. And they're like, well, my times are really good. And I'm like, they are really good. But I think that if you did it a different way, you could do better. I think you might know from being you're in Sweden, is that correct? You're in Switzerland. So in Europe, if you look at Vasaloppet Nordic ski racers, where they're very long races and they're double pulling. So essentially the ski erg movement on there. It's more about tempo, and it's tempo of the pulling. And if you look at some on snow, just like if you walk that on water rowing is to the erg, and you look at some on snow ski erg, there is some transfer there. Now, there's a lot of variables that don't come into play on the ski erg, so you can just kind of muscle it and do pretty well there. But and I do think I mean, some people might beat me up on this, but it's not as technical as the rowing stroke. The rowing stroke to me always seems a little bit more technical and a bigger need to getting better technique on the rower than the skier. Because I mean, if you look at me at intensity, I can ski pretty and I can get good times on long skis. But when it comes down to like a buddy dares you to see how fast you can do 100 meters, yeah, my technique looks like crap too, and I'm just beast boating it. So you can generate a lot of force on it, but there is a technique to it. And one pet peeve, and there's not many people who still do it, but it used to be what they call the butterfly, where people would on the recovery of
it's still there. It's still there.
It's just so odd to me because they're purposely lengthening the time for the next stroke. And all I can think of is there was a butterfly swimmer that did really well on the ski erg, and he did it. And everyone said, oh, I'm going to do just like that guy did for no other reason. And I do have some good friends that still do it. And, I've just given up on it. If that's the way they want to do it, that's fine. But getting up to that next stroke is more important than a slow. And for those of us with tight shoulders, it's not a comfortable position to do that long, loopy recovery on the ski erg.
Yeah, my opening line on the ski erg workshop is, what is the shortest distance between 2 points? And then everybody says a straight line. And then I repeat the exact same question 3 times. And they're like, can you stop? We're here to ski. And then, so that's always my opener. And obviously, like you said, efficiency on those machines and being proficient in your movement is so important. And going back in a straight line is always going to be going around the whole town to get back to the top. Another thing that I find very useful on the ski, and full credit to Justin Farina from Garage Athlete for that. I followed his rowing program for a while when I was rowing and got tremendous results. And honestly, the community he's built is outstanding. So Justin, if you're listening, props out to you, my friend.
Yeah,
one thing that he puts forward on the ski is using the power curve and looking at the force curve. And that helps me a lot because, again, that PM5, and we're going to get to it, that PM5 is gold. It gives you so much information in real time. And that feedback on how you're actually pulling is all the information you need to get your technique better and understand that you need a big bump at the beginning, because this is where you're going to generate the most force and be able to create the most power and get the flywheel going. And it's not at the end by your ankles when you're, at the end of the stop with the rope that's going to happen. And if you can just get your technique to, again, your technique doesn't have to look perfect, textbook or anything, but if you can make sure that most of the force that you produce is in that initial part of the pull, you're probably going to do better than if you don't.
And it's crazy that, again, the harp on it, but like people, if I said, okay, I want you to hang from a rope, do you want to hang from a rope with your hands by your forehead, or do you want them to be by your ankles? What's a better body position? Where can you generate the most force? So like, oh, that's a stupid question. I want to be in this position here with that locked elbow, and I'm like, exactly, that's what you wanted to do. So you can load up those handles with your body weight and that power from the large muscle groups. Don't worry about that little bit of power down by your ankles. Make that up at the top of the stroke. And it's, yeah, I mean, it is hard though, because there are some amazing people with really bad technique. And if you just look at their times, you're like, yeah, I can't do those times. It's impressive, but they're also larger individuals who spend a lot of time on the machine. So.
Yeah, it's if you have those attributes, maybe you can get away with it, but most people should spend a bit more time working on smoothing out their movement on those machines.
Now, was it you? Because I was following you from when you were doing the French. You were talking about the when people ask about rowing for calories versus rowing for meters. Was that you? That
I don't believe it was me. No.
Okay, I saw another trainer, and he put it really well. He's actually he was also a rower, and CrossFitters want to, for some reason, think that you're going to row differently for calories than for meters, and it's my pet peeve. And this guy put it well, and he said, rowing for calories versus rowing for meters is like saying you're going to lift differently for pounds or kilograms. And it's like, if you want to be efficient, efficiency is going to find itself no matter what the metric is. So, these people said, oh, I row this way because I'm rowing for calories. And it's like, no, a good rowing stroke is going to be a good rowing stroke no matter what unit you are on there. And when they said that, I'm like, that's a great way to put it. It's just another unit, and your efficiency in the movement takes priority.
Yeah, no, 100% on those two machines. You have to consider that. Do you know what proportion, if you look at the 100% of Concept 2 ergs that are out there in the world, what's the proportion of rowers versus skis versus bikes?
Oh, so just based on the years, I mean, there's infinitely more rowing machines out there. Oddly enough, so we had a ski erg 1. It was this gray machine, and you couldn't do one arm independently from the other stuff, and that was out there. And then we made the ski erg 2, which was significantly better than what we have now. And it took a while, and I would say only in the last 5 to 6 years we really see the ski erg going up, and but we're seeing it for different reasons. Yes, it's getting more popular within the functional fitness markets, but also the adaptive market. Anybody who's ever had a lower extremity injury, it's so versatile. So we do a lot of stuff with veteran organizations, and I have some friends now that are doing training for this 200-mile run, 10-mile swim, this crazy event. And they use the ski erg, even though they're doing all this running, because of the overuse. If they just ran all the time, there's no way they could get the volume they wanted without their bodies breaking down. And these guys are all out of the military now, and they have families and stuff. So they're looking at efficiency. So when they want to work on baseline cardio, they can now do it using the ski erg and save the overuse of the lower extremity. So it's an amazing tool. And I have to say, it is my favorite of the three personally. But I wasn't an on-water, rower, and I'm not a very tall guy, and I instantly did better at the ski erg. And I did race some Nordic skiing in college and stuff. And so maybe it's because I feel more comfortable on it, but I also think it's a very, very versatile machine. In CrossFit, most things that we do are hip opening movements. And so I liked it because other than toes to bar and ball slams, there's very little power application in the closed hip movement. And you're not going to do
V-ups.
And V-ups, and you're not going to do those for 20 minutes. And you're not going to do it, it's like, you're not going to generate that same kind of force. And to be honest, even when I did ball slams, I was half-assing the slam most of the time anyways. So it wasn't the same as the ski erg. So I think for CrossFit, it is an amazing tool to implement in your day-to-day WODs, and then also have a proficiency if you want to compete on it as well. It is my favorite. And the bike, I enjoy, but my bike for me, I get on that when those days I just don't feel like working out, and I said, I'll just go get on the bike, and then you get the blood flowing on the bike, and you're like, all right, now I'm good. Now I'll start working out. Like that.
Yeah, and going back to a broader point that you just made, I think one of the main advantages of those machines is that you don't have any impact. And compared to running, like you said, you can accumulate infinitely more, cycling, rowing, and skiing than you can running. I had a Hunter McIntyre on the podcast yesterday. It was the Hyrox, three-time Hyrox world champion.
I know Hunter really well. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, he's a fun cat. And he said in his off season now, even though Hyrox is very much a running based sport, it's running centric, more like 55-60% of your time on the floor is running. In his off season, 50% of his volume is on the bike, because you can go ride for 6 hours. You can't run for 6 hours, or at least not every day when you're 200 pounds.
It is, and I like the time efficiency. The same reason why I fell in love with CrossFit way back in the GPV early Glassman days is very time efficient. You got very fit without taking time away from family and job and all this other stuff. And our machines are the same way. Like, I do enjoy trail running. We live in a beautiful spot in Vermont. I love running in the woods and on the mountains and stuff. But a good run for trail running might be an hour or more, where if I'm just doing it to improve my fitness, I can do it faster and more efficient on an erg than I can. And again, also, I mean, not that I'm afraid of injury, but it definitely a lot safer too. The other thing is, there's very few machines or strength-based machines that is it's basically a concentric contraction only. So it's we're kind of unique in that way. And so it's not like you're resisting on the way back like a lot of these plate loaded kind of the machines that are out there now. It's very safe movements. I'm talking about ski erg and rower, obviously, not just the bike. So
yeah, absolutely. And that also means you can do more volume and have less of a quote unquote traumatic impact, even though training is not trauma. It's just stress, but it's less stress on the body, but the stimulus is there, which is great. Another thing that I love about your products is the PM5. And I'm not saying that because you're on the podcast now. I say it all the time. It's by far the best monitor on the market. And so first I want to thank you guys for that. And I want to go over a few cheat codes, if you have some, for the PM5, for those that maybe don't know how to use it as well as they can. But first, talk about, how did you guys come to making such a comprehensive data set and such a good monitor, such an accurate monitor too, where you can literally know that if your machine's calibrated and you're next to someone, you're rowing 2000, everybody's going to row the same distance.
Well, that's a great thing about it, is because everyone asks, like, oh, I got an old machine, it probably needs to be recalibrated. Well, little known fact, it calibrates between strokes. So your machine is fine. It doesn't need to be recalibrated. It's great. You might end up having to, say you got your machine 10 years ago and it's in a dusty basement, your screen might be getting a little bit dusty. It's not any less accurate. It just means that instead of rowing, say, at a 3 damper, you might need to move your damper lever because of the airflow. But it's not the monitor itself. Whatever it says is what you did. That was the work that you did, and so that's the accuracy. And that really is our claim to fame. That's why Crash B's World Championships, that's why, Olympic rowers are making or not making a team by fractions of a second based on what we say. And the brothers don't take that lightly, especially guys that actually tried to make teams. It's like that, think of how bad you would feel if you're like, oh, our machine caused someone from another 4-year cycle of being in the Olympics, or something like that. We get knocked a lot. Right now, there's this trend, which I don't enjoy, is we kind of call it, exertainment. In other words, if I work out, I want a color screen, I want video, I want to watch someone row down a river, I want to do blah, 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 blah. I say to that is, and you don't really want to work out. You're looking for
babysitting.
Yeah. Our monitor gives you data. It gives you stuff that you need to make yourself better. And it's monochrome. It's not even color. But I can guarantee you, whatever you need for a metric, it's there, whether it be watts, whether it be, pace over time, your force curve. And then you take it into the logbook and you can even make it more gritty if you wanted to, as far as that programmability. A lot of this, and I do enjoy CrossFit, but I don't want to sound like that's all that I do. But a lot of the cool changes in the PM5 came from that sport because of what they needed. They needed variable intervals. So if I'm using this in a WOD and I am going to row 500 meters and then go do 20 pull-ups, well, you might be able to get back in time the first round, but you don't know how long those 20 pull-ups are going to take you the fifth round in. So things like the variable interval features on our work, when you're programming your workouts and stuff. And I still think, other than people like yourself or people who are really into it, there are people that just go to affiliates and gyms around that have never been on anything other than the one screen. Like, they don't even know the other options. And what's cool about that, we do make one screen. It's large numbers, split your time and your stroke rate. So if you don't want to be bothered with anything else, that's it. But if you want to see your pace per 500, your pace per workout, your projected finish time over your force curve, it's there for you if you want to do it on there. So yeah, it's more of a computer than it is a monitor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely is. And there's nothing better. I remember from my rowing days, when you're going through many short or long intervals, and the only thing keeping you sane is trying to get the perfect screen and get the exact same time or the exact same meters on every intervals. It's a great little mental challenge, and it does also help you forget the pain a little bit and makes for a cool Instagram picture after.
I bet you can do it too, because you've spent so much time on the Erg. But like, so the owners of Concept 2, Dick especially, he's been on, he invented it. He's on it out every single day. I could have him row and cover up his monitor and say, what pace are you rowing? And he would know his pace. And through his whole workout, it would not change. He could hold it. There's some people that are so good at knowing their stroke rate is so dialed, it doesn't vary from one to the other, and they know how their body feels, that they can actually predict their pace. So I have a good friend. So, and he knows Justin Farina very well too, but his name is Pat Gillies. He's out of Madison, Wisconsin, Pat's gym. And we were doing a really hard workout, and he saw me close my eyes in the middle of a workout just because I was in so much pain. And he came up to me by my ear and he said, no, leave your eyes open. You need to see the screen. And it's because you can't, it's like a lie detector. You might think you're doing fine, but then all of a sudden your splits are going down, and you need to see that they're going down so you can make that mental shift and say, oh, wait, I got to bring, okay, if I was doing a 145 and I closed my eyes and it went to 146, well, I need to take 2 strokes at a 144 to make up for that, to get my same average that I need. And I'm still one of those guys that if I'm really in that dark place, I want to close my eyes. But when he said that, I'm like, you're right. I do need to keep watching my monitor, because it's the one that's telling me, where I'm at, and that gives you that little motivation to not slack on there. So
there's another great feature from the PM5 that is not on the PM5 currently. It's only on the app, and that's the drive length and the drive speed, which I find are 2 fantastic metrics to teach and to learn the rowing stroke and the skiing stroke. Do you guys have any plans to make that available directly on the screen?
We've run down, you've probably seen it. So we try to keep it simple with the 5 buttons on the side and 3 on the bottom of that. We're getting to the point now that we've got memory available in there to do something like that. It's literally functionality. So the idea with the Erg data and the phone holder is that you'd have your Erg data above your monitor. So you look at your monitor for your metrics, but you could then look at your phone that's above the monitor at your stroke length and acceleration. The nice thing about these guys, they're always working on something, and we have wish list whiteboards. And so believe me, there's stuff coming out, over the next couple of years that it's going to be constantly improved upon. But what's cool is we don't just improve upon it because we want to necessarily sell more products. We get, like, people like yourself. I would really like it if X. I want it to do this. We put it on the whiteboard, and then we go to do the next firmware update. We're like, well, can we do that? Well, sure we can. We do this, this, and this, and then next thing you know, it comes in a firmware update, and it's free. You can always update the monitor, which is cool. The owners don't believe in engineered obsolescence. So you bought your rowing machine 10 years ago, you might need to. Well, you went from PM3s to PM5, but since you had the PM5, if we come up with a cool idea or something new, we give it to you for free. Just update your monitor. And so many gyms don't even do that. The variable interval thing when that came out says, oh, how come mine doesn't do that? I'm like, well, it can. You just got to go to the website, download it, and fix your monitor, or not fix it, but just improve it and add more stuff into it. And the fact that we charge for it. So.
When I was at the French Soda, and I got a good amount of chatting done with Thierry, who's one of the CEOs of Thierry and Thierry, who are the two CEOs of Incept.
And Thierry Benoit.
Incept France. And he told me that now you can actually update your firmware through the app. You don't have to go through the site anymore.
Yeah, well, it's certain PM5s on there, so it has to do with the hardware in there. But yeah, it's great. And with Erg data, it will tell you once you connect Erg data to your PM5, it'll even say, hey, we noticed you're not running the most current firmware. Do you want to do it now? Which is great. Even on my Ergs at home, I just did all my Ergs at home, and they're all, not up to date. But we have this new feature called the loop, where you can actually, like, if you were, overseas and rowing, and I was here in Vermont, and we were at the same time, we were in this loop, I would see your icon going around, and I would be there with you, and I could see your pace and all this stuff. And I had to update my firmware to get the loop to work on my monitor, so I just did all mine, and it's super simple. I understand some gyms when they got to do 20 machines, but I mean, you do other maintenance on your equipment, you should do that too.
You definitely should. Another cheat code that Thierry showed me is how to keep your screen on for 12 hours, which was mind-blowing for the couple friends I was with and who run gyms and who run competitions. And when Thierry showed them that, and me too, I didn't know, it just that their mind exploded, because they've been using your equipment for over a decade. So how do we do that? What's the cheat code, Greg?
So we actually didn't want to tell people that for a long time, mainly because if you leave it on, it stays on for 12 hours, and we would get phone calls saying, oh, there's something wrong with your monitor, my batteries keep dying. Well, I'm like, no, one of your members put it in 12-hour mode, and this will happen. But I actually feel like responsible for making that one happen, because again, I think it was 2010, there was a CrossFit event with Camille LeBlanc-Bazinet, was from Montreal, and it used to be that it would power off after 2 minutes because it would save your battery life. So at the games, I tell all the announcers, don't hold the athletes too long. So we'd have the judges set up their monitors, and then, they'd do say what they had to say and whatever. And if they didn't start when they were supposed to, the monitors would time off on there. They had to hit the buttons. And so we told them that. So the judges know if somebody was announcing and got too long-winded, they would just hit any button and it would just refresh it and stay on for another 2 minutes. Well, I was in the stands, they're ready to go. I see every judge but one refresh it. And I expect, oh no, here it goes. And 3, 2, 1, go. She went to go pull her first stroke, and her monitor turned off. Now, if she had kept rowing, it would have came on as soon as it sensed it moving. But she just dropped the handle and started crying. And so it was this big thing. And so we came back and said, we can't have this happen. When I go to an event, I need to put it in this mode, because a lot of times I can't even be on the floor depending on the security and stuff like that. So I need to have it on well in advance. And that's when they made this 12-hour mode. So if you go to the battery section on the monitor, and it's going to be, there's units button 3 times and display button 3 times, and look at my monitor just to refresh my memory. And then it gives it a chance to go in 12-hour mode. Now, it'll stay in that 12-hour mode, obviously, for 12 hours, unless you do the same button pushing again, and that takes it out of 12-hour mode. But for competitions, it's invaluable. But for everyday use, it does eat up a lot of batteries because the LCD stays on and that. So that's why we just don't make it like common knowledge to everybody to do it. So
Yeah, so disclaimer, turn off your 12-hour mode after you're done your competition
well, if you
or your
don't,
workout.
yeah, just don't call and complain to us that your monitor's bad. So,
Exactly. We gave you the cheat code and the uncheat code, and you have to use both.
yeah.
Do you have any other little nuggets like this that most people don't know about using the PM5 and little tricks that can be useful?
Just the memory feature. So say you're somebody who doesn't go to your go on your computer to the logbook to do all of your stuff, is that there is well, in the PM5, I think it's something like 3,000 workouts it stores in there. So what's nice about that is, if you do set times or set distances, you can actually go back and look at them all together based on date.
Mhm.
So if you're like, say that example of when Froning was doing 10K a day, if he went to his memory on his monitor and looked up 10Ks, they would all be there by date, and he could
Mhm.
see, was he a fraction of a second slower one day or the other? You can do it all right on your monitor,
Mhm.
because all of us, because of work, sometimes we just don't want to use a computer when we get home, and a lot of times you don't need to. You can do it all right on your PM5,
Mhm.
uh, or three, or even the old twos were pretty good. So
Yeah, and for those who do enter their times and want to be competitive on the log platform, even if you haven't done the workout synced up to your phone, you can go into the memory screen, go to the workout that you just did, and I believe you press twice on the second button from the bottom, and it'll display a verification code in the top right. I believe it's a 16 digit
you're
code, and you
good.
can enter that into the log, and it validates your score, because obviously there's an algorithm in there that's going to give you a specific code for a specific performance on a given machine, and then the log checks that, and that allows people around the world to do workouts without somebody filming them or looking at them, and still have a valid score that can be verified.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I mean, first of all, kudos that that. Most people don't know that in there. Usually they say, "Oh, I broke a record," and they want us to just take their word for it. And we say, "Well, you got to go back in your memory and get us this code." Um, Not so much that we don't trust them, but everybody else won't trust them. It's not necessarily, especially if we know the person. Um, there's a lot of information in that little code, and same with the Erg data app. So like right now, the World Bike Erg sprints are going on this week, 1,000 meters. When you do it with Erg data, when it goes into the online logbook, there's all this embedded information, like what was the altitude, the temperature, the drag factor, all this stuff in there. So yes, you can go in the logbook and hand enter a time. Like I could go in right now and put today's date. I did 1,000 meters on the bike erg and it took me 40 seconds. It would go in there as unverified. In
Mm.
other words, I'm not going to call up and say I broke a world record or something like that, because it's unverified. The way to either need a verification code, have it go through Erg data, or have it be done in an in-person event, and have it documented.
Mhm.
That's really what we need to do. And again, it's not like we're trying to be the police, but people are like, there are guys that live and breathe by these ergs, and if someone puts in a score, we hear about it like instantly. They're like, "Hey, so and so is a liar," and we're like, "We're not going to call this guy a liar," So then they're like, we call up and we just politely say, "Could you go back in your memory and get the verification code and all that stuff?" So
Yeah, I have a numbers story, and I hope I'm gonna get the numbers right. It's from an athlete I was lucky enough to work with a couple times. His name is Barnaby.
oh
He
yeah,
was one of the best rowers in Switzerland,
yeah.
the best on the machine at least. And during the pandemic, he trained like a madman to try and get his 2K down, and he rode his 2K. And if you add up the times on the 500 meter, the 4 or 500 meter segments, he's at 5:39.9, but the screen rounded him up to 5:40. And I think he was a little disgusted about that.
Yeah, actually, Barnaby, I think, was one who coached Esslinger
Yeah.
before the games, which
Mhm.
he told me that. But then I saw how he wrote it, and I'm like, "Are you sure?" But then, but yeah, he's also good friends with my coworker that runs the office over there. But yeah, I definitely know the name on there. Yeah, the monitor, like I said, we actually had a T-shirt years ago in CrossFit saying that it was the human lie detector, because you can say you're fit, but the monitor will tell you if you're fit, or what your pain tolerance is. It's not your own, how you see yourself, that monitor will let you know. So
we talked about the different improvements that have come into the monitor recently. The loop is really cool to see other people doing it at the same time. The firmware update that you can do automatically with your phone. What other upgrades can you talk about that are coming out in the next few months or maybe even years?
I can't talk about them, but there's going to be some really cool one I'm very, very excited for. And I would think it'd probably be around the first of the year. And it's going to be something that I believe a lot of online coaches will find very valuable, but that's all I can say on it.
I like it.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's for us, and it sounds corny as a business, it's not a financial thing. It's like we used to literally say, what would we want on our machine? Like, what do we want? Because we all use our equipment. And it hasn't steered us wrong. If we make ourselves happy, our people who buy our equipment are happy. If we can't do something, it's typically because of the amount of memory space or it's cost prohibitive. Like we could do, we could do a 12-inch flat panel on a rower, but who wants to pay $2,000 for a rowing machine, or more? I mean, we've seen rowing machine companies, especially during COVID, that came out that were just crazy amounts of money that are no longer around anymore, because come to find out, people who want entertainment don't really want to be fit, and they're going to work out for about 3 months and then sell it, and so yeah, we kind of stay in our lane whenever possible. We're not flashy people. I mean, you look at any Concept 2 employee, the way we're dressed at events and how we interact with people. We're not flashy. We're more of a, just get the work done kind of people. So.
Yeah, very sober machines, but they get the job done.
Yeah.
So you guys had the rower first, then the ski, then the bike. Hands down, the bike is my personal favorite. And all my athletes will hate me for saying this, but I think it's the single most interesting conditioning tool that nobody uses currently.
Yeah.
And it's really great. But I'd like to know, because you guys, like you said, you have an infinite wish list that comes in from all your users. What is the requested fourth machine, if there is one, on the market currently?
Well, before we made our bike, everybody wanted us to make a bike with arms.
Right.
They wanted us to basically make
a better assault bike.
Right. With our monitor that didn't break. And I can say it now, we had a prototype with arms and it was great.
Do you have pictures of that?
Probably you wouldn't want to see it. The weight on the wheel was literally saw blades. It was like we would get shut down. This thing was so dangerous, this prototype. You literally could have cut plywood with this once you got really moving fast. Yeah. Our R&D area is really kind of cool here. So what we came back to, so Pete and Dick believe in sport, and rowing is a sport, skiing is a sport, cycling is a sport. And I think Dick said in a meeting, he probably doesn't even remember it, he said, until there is a sport of air biking with arms, it's not a sport, it's a training device. And the other thing is, so we're a very active company. We all ski, we row, a lot of mountain bikers here. So we make products that we would want to have in our own basements. And I was probably the only person that used the bike with arms, because I was one of the few CrossFitters for a long time. So I was all for it. Like, we should do this. But I lost out. And then luckily, our friends at Rogue, which we're really good friends with, Bill and Katie Henniger, who own Rogue, and have a lot of respect for those guys. The year we came out with our bike and decided not to do the arms, we went out to Columbus, Ohio, and they're like, hey, we want to show you something. And they wheeled out an Echo bike. I'm like, thank God we didn't make one with arms on it. So, but I mean, personally, my wish list, if we ever were back when I'm probably in the early 90s, we had a strength machine that people don't know about. A lot of people, it's called a dyno, and it would do over 1,000 pounds resistance, and the whole machine only weighed about 150 pounds. We sold a lot to the British military. We sold a lot to rowing clubs, but we didn't sell enough to really make it viable. So we ended up shelving the idea, and I would love to see it come back. But again, there's very few of us that are very strength-minded like myself here. A lot of people are still very cardio-based, but man, I think we could make a kick-ass strength machine if we wanted to. So
that'd be pretty cool. All right, man. That was fun. Thanks for coming on. It's always a pleasure getting to know people that, live in the same ecosystem and use the same devices, and for you has been working on the devices for decades now, which is awesome. Where can people find out more about you if they want to follow your stuff online?
Yeah, so I have my personal account, which is Concept2 Greg. And that's typically going to be when I go to events or things are going on, I try to post it. And I also do a lot of reposting of people outside the normal community that I think you should know, whether it be adaptive or military or something like that. It's going to be more probably strength based than our Concept2 Inc. Instagram, which is going to have a lot more too of like the World Cup rowing and stuff like that on there. So between the two, you get a good idea of basically what Concept2 is doing on there. Our website is a big thing. So any information you need on Concept2, our website's a lot like our monitor. It has way more stuff than people know.
It does.
And we have pace calculators that I think are invaluable. Everyone should have a pace calculator handy whenever they're doing any event, just to get an idea of what they can hold and stuff like that. So that's a good one. And I wanted to thank you too. Like I said, it was funny when you reached out because I saw your Instagram post. I might have even been one that Instagram knew I would like you, and it said, follow. And I go, oh man, he's at the French Throwdown. That's one event I've never been to the French Throwdown, and it's on my wish list. I've been to tons of events. I've never been there. And then you messaged me and you're like, oh, I reached out to Concept2 and they said that you couldn't do the podcast. I'm like, what, are you kidding me? I go, love to do the podcast. So and I'm glad we ended up getting hooked up and doing it. So thank you for all you do in promoting us and rowing in general and the strength community. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Well, it was great to have you on, and well, until next time.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you would like to support the podcast, please take a few moments to leave a written review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. If you want to watch this episode again, you can find the full video recording on my YouTube channel. You'll also find hundreds of hours of free content, all my podcasts, my thoughts of the day, structured presentations, and more. So don't wait, go subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.